He ruled the office, mocking those beneath him, especially her. Just this morning, he laughed in her face. But now, she sat across from him, calm and in control. "Edward Carter, you're fired." His world collapsed in an instant. But what happened next will shock even those who've seen it all. Let's start from the beginning. Edward Carter lived for control. Every glance, every word, every smirk reinforced his dominance over the office. He thrived on obedience, taking pleasure in reminding people of their place. And no one, in his eyes, was lower than the cleaning staff. Alicia Brooks had seen men like him before. 42 years old, experienced, and resilient, she had spent years cleaning corporate offices, watching powerful men come and go. She knew how to stay unnoticed, how to work quietly, while people like Carter dismissed her as invisible. That's exactly how he saw her, someone too insignificant to matter. That afternoon, the office buzzed with the usual corporate chatter. Executives rushed between meetings, interns scrambled to impress, and Alicia did what she always did, her job. She knelt on the floor, scrubbing away the evidence of someone else's careless mess, her movements steady and practiced. Then came the clapping, slow, deliberate. "Let's hear it for our star employee." Edward's voice rang out, dripping with mockery. Heads turned, conversations paused. He spread his arms theatrically, enjoying the attention. Alicia froze but didn't look up. Maybe if she scrubs hard enough, she'll get promoted to chief of mopping. The laughter erupted, sharp, eager, sycophantic. Alicia tightened her grip on the mop. The sting of humiliation burned, but she refused to give him what he wanted. Slowly, she lifted her gaze and met his eyes. Calm, unshaken. The steady confidence in her expression made something flicker, just for a second, behind his arrogant smirk. Edward scoffed and turned away, already moving on, already forgetting. But Alicia didn't forget. That night, she walked home, her body aching, her mind alive. Years of hard work, of quiet endurance, of sacrifice had brought her here. She had spent nights studying, building connections, preparing for a future beyond scrubbing floors. Edward Carter thought he knew power. He thought he controlled everything around him. But soon, very soon, his world would shift. And Alicia Brooks would be the one giving the orders. Alicia Brooks had spent years being underestimated. People saw a cleaner, a background figure, someone whose presence barely registered. But Alicia was never just a cleaner. By night, she scrubbed floors and emptied trash bins. By day, she studied business management, absorbing everything she could about corporate structures, financial strategy, and power dynamics. While executives barely acknowledged her, she listened. While they dismissed her, she observed. And while they assumed she was invisible, she gathered information. Edward Carter's office was a goldmine of secrets. The careless arrogance of the powerful always left traces. Misplaced documents, open laptops, hushed conversations they thought no one could hear. Cleaning late at night, Alicia saw things no one else did. Unapproved expenses, emails hinting at fraud, numbers that didn't add up. One evening, she lingered near the conference room, moving soundlessly as two junior executives whispered urgently. Their voices were low, cautious, but not cautious enough. "The merger's a disaster," one muttered. "If Carter keeps pushing, we're looking at a multi-million-dollar loss." Alicia didn't react, didn't slow her movements. But inside, a switch flipped. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. The next morning, she made a phone call. It was time. Alicia didn't reach out to just anyone. She contacted Marianne Lawson, one of the most influential figures in the company, someone with the power to shift the balance. Marianne had always been different from the other executives. She paid attention. She noticed people who worked hard, who knew their worth. And she had noticed Alicia. So when Alicia laid out the details, the mismanaged merger, the financial discrepancies, the careless corruption, it didn't take much for Marianne to see the opportunity. The tide was turning. Meanwhile, Edward Carter remained blissfully unaware. He walked through the office with the same smug confidence, convinced of his own invincibility. That afternoon, he passed Alicia in the hallway, barely glancing at her before chuckling under his breath. "You'll always be nothing more than a mop pusher," he sneered, eyes filled with the kind of certainty only fools possess. Alicia simply smiled. Edward Carter entered the boardroom with the same air of superiority he carried everywhere. But something felt off. The usual corporate pleasantries were absent. Conversations were hushed. Glances were exchanged. As he took his seat, his eyes scanned the room. Unfamiliar faces, senior executives, high-level investors, people who didn't normally concern themselves with routine meetings. Then he saw her. At the head of the table, sitting with quiet authority, was Marianne Lawson. Beside her, composed, confident, and completely unfazed, was Alicia Brooks. Edward's smirk faltered. The meeting began. Marianne spoke first, her tone sharp and deliberate. She laid out the case against him: financial mismanagement, reckless decision-making, unethical practices. The evidence was irrefutable. Emails flashed across the screen, showcasing his negligence, his arrogance, his complete disregard for responsibility. Edward shifted in his seat. "This is ridiculous," he scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. Then Alicia spoke, calm, eloquent, precise. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. With measured confidence, she detailed every mistake he had made, every misstep, every sign of incompetence he had so carelessly displayed. She knew because she had seen it all, while scrubbing floors, while emptying trash bins, while being treated as invisible. And now, here she was, holding the floor, while he could do nothing but listen. Edward's face turned red. His hands clenched the armrests of his chair. "This is absurd. This woman, she's just a janitor," he barked, desperate to regain control. Marianne leaned forward, her expression cold, final. "Correction," she said. "She's the company's newest internal operations manager, effective today. And per board decision, you, Edward Carter, are terminated immediately." Silence. Edward sat frozen, his brain scrambling for a response. This wasn't possible. This wasn't happening. Alicia stood up, locking eyes with him. She didn't gloat, didn't raise her voice. She simply smiled. "Looks like I got that promotion after all," she said smoothly. Edward opened his mouth, but no words came. Security arrived. A hand on his shoulder. A firm instruction. He was escorted out. The fallout was immediate. Edward Carter's dismissal sent shockwaves through the office, a reminder that power was never as permanent as it seemed. Whispers filled the hallways. Cautious glances were exchanged, and the laughter that once followed Alicia Brooks had been replaced with silence. Those who had joined in Carter's mockery now saw her in a different light. Some approached her hesitantly, murmuring apologies, hoping to erase their past complicity. Others avoided eye contact entirely, pretending nothing had happened. A few, the most opportunistic ones, suddenly found themselves eager to be on her good side. Alicia acknowledged none of it. She had never needed their approval before, and she didn't need it now. Her validation wasn't in their words. It was in the seat Carter had once occupied, the position she had earned, not through cruelty or arrogance, but through patience, intelligence, and strategy. One evening, as she made her final rounds through the now quiet office, she heard hesitant footsteps behind her. She turned to see a young intern, barely in his 20s, shifting nervously in place. Ms. Brooks, he said, his voice uncertain but sincere. I wanted to say you inspire me. Alicia studied him for a moment, recognizing something familiar in his expression. An eagerness to prove himself, a quiet determination to succeed despite the odds. She rested a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Work hard, stay sharp, and never let people like Edward Carter define your worth. The intern nodded, his admiration clear. Alicia turned, walked to the nearest light switch, and flicked it off. The office dimmed, leaving only the glow of city lights reflecting off the windows. She stepped outside, breathing in the crisp night air. Justice had been served, and Alicia Brooks was just getting started.